Yes, yes. Welcome to another episode of Motherfucking Valuable Perspectives. Oh man, I'm really excited that we have another special guest with us today, Auryn, who's in charge of the Zodiac toolset that's helping people scale DAOs. Thank you for joining us, Auryn.
No worries. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, I reached out to you because I saw that you are a big part of the team that's creating this tool set. And, I feel like I've recently had that aha moment personally about DAOs and how I think DAOs can change the world. So, man, I'm really excited to kind of dive into the details of DAOs and everything that you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. Dive in. I'm always glad to I don't know, experience that aha moment along with people and like help other people kind of reach it. It's DAOs are something I've been really passionate about and working on since 2016 and yeah, it never stops being exciting, never stops being fun, kind of helping people along that journey and kind of the last couple of years, like the pace of innovation in DAO tooling has been phenomenal, and
Mm.
so yeah, really excited to dive down that rabbit hole.
I love it. And maybe some of y'all listening or watching can have that aha moment with us. So stay tuned. Awesome. So, Oren, why don't you tell us how did you first get into DAOs? You started in 2016. Like, what was your aha moment?
Right. Well, actually, I guess maybe the rabbit hole started a few years earlier for me with that. So my former life, I played basketball professionally, mostly out
Nice.
in Australia, a little bit in Europe, and I at one point news came on and I saw a report about the deep web, the dark web, and immediately it was like, oh, okay, what is this? I have to go and poke around. I have to go see what it is. And so stumbling through kind of the Tor browser and a bunch of kind of .onion sites, I eventually made my way to a few different marketplaces, and everything was denominated in Bitcoin. And so this is like 2013, I guess, and I'm just like, I have no idea what Bitcoin is. I don't know what it means when it says, one Bitcoin or 0.01 Bitcoin or whatever it was then. And so that's kind of where my rabbit hole started, is like discovering that and trying to kind of learn what Bitcoin was and why things in these marketplaces were denominated in Bitcoin rather than in US dollars or Australian dollars, since that's where I was at the
Right.
time. And anyway, shortly after, I mean, I kind of tumbled down the rabbit hole there, started exploring, and shortly after that, kind of came across a bunch of Vitalik's kind of really early posts about Ethereum, and that was the real kind of aha moment for me in terms of like why blockchains or like how blockchains could really become useful. It was the idea of these kind of programmable assets where you essentially have this kind of trusted or this trustless kind of decentralized execution environment. Essentially, a bunch of people can trustlessly share in the same execution environment.
Can I ask you
And
something?
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm like just curious, like as a basketball player, like how did that register for you? Like what else were you doing? Like it feels like you were more than just like your pro basketball player in that moment.
Right. I mean, I've always been a nerd at heart, I guess.
Mm.
I mean, prior to going to the US to play college basketball and stuff like that, I had started doing computer science at university in Australia, and I think that always just kind of was there as like an underlying current, always something that I was interested in. And the thing again that like really got me excited about was the idea of DAOs in some of Vitalik's early posts.
Right.
The idea of these kind of essentially much more equitable organizations that can very easily, very low friction, kind of transcend national borders, avoid a bunch of, or not have the necessity to rely on kind of legal institutions. And I think like coming from a really privileged background in Australia and in the US, I live in the US now. It's less of an issue, like for the most part, I can trust my legal institutions, but that's
Right.
not the case in a lot of the world. And so like,
Right.
I think this kind of technology has real potential to be absolutely like monumentally world changing in a lot of places where the legal institutions don't actually serve the public. And I mean, like, there's some arguments to say that that's probably the case in most places, but it's very obviously the case in some other parts of the world.
Right. And to your point, I think it's a spectrum, right? So it's like you might have a bad experience here in the United States, but at least there's a law system, right? That like tries to be fair for the most part.
Right. Exactly. So, for the most part, I can rely on it. And so it's not as necessary, but there's still some huge kind of barriers to entry to setting up and kind of successfully running organizations, although they are kind of progressively getting much lower and lower. Like, it's pretty easy to set up an LLC now. But comparatively, like, setting up a DAO is insanely low friction. It's something that a handful of folks can do in set up a Discord server and a Gnosis Safe multi-sig, and there's plenty of people that would question whether that's truly a DAO or not, but it's really low friction to get up and running and to start doing stuff together, collaboratively working on stuff. And so that idea of like low friction and the potential for kind of much more equitable organizations is what really kind of captured my enthusiasm and has kind of held onto it since then. And then it wasn't until later on in 2016 where I stumbled on this project called the DAO really early. So kind of got involved in that within the first few weeks of them setting up the community or setting up the initial parts of the community, and realized that the DAO kind of needed its own separate home. So I went and founded a forum, DAO Hub, and that ended up becoming a kind of de facto home for the DAOs community. And so
is that like DAOhub.com or what's the address?
It was DAOhub.org. It is no longer live. It now redirects to a new kind of DAO community called DAObase, cool. Which I am not involved with, but DAObase is kind of the spiritual successor. So we handed it over to those guys, and they're doing a really great job. But it's so the DAO was this project. For anyone that's not familiar, it was kind of the first attempt at a kind of on-chain DAO organization. It had this meteoric rise in terms of raising a bunch of capital and enthusiasm. I think at one point it had, I don't know, 4 or 5% of the total Ether supply kind of locked up in it. It had raised, I don't know, some ludicrous amount of money, and then ended up being a vulnerability found in it shortly after it went live. And so it had this kind of catastrophic fall, and which ended up resulting in a hard fork of the Ethereum network. So really, really like tumultuous time then.
So that's what created the classic, the Ethereum classic right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
And so this was my kind of like baptism of fire into like creating communities or like helping to grow and manage communities. And what really kind of, I guess, got me ingrained in the Ethereum space and in DAO culture.
That's really awesome. So for everybody who like is just kind of getting in tune with like what is DAOs, can you just explain like what is a DAO and like why should people know about them?
Right. So I mean, I guess back to the absolute basics, DAO is a Decentralized Autonomous Organization, and it's essentially just an organizational pattern where you attempt to distribute control as broadly as possible and set up the control structures in such a way that the participants can kind of interact with it autonomously, and the system implements some rules as to kind of how they interact to kind of collectively make decisions. And so kind of instantiations of that are typically things like voting structures where everyone who's a participant has some kind of vote weight or vote token or something like that, and then like a proposal system for collectively deciding on what the DAO wants to do. In terms of use cases, they're really, really broad, and kind of in terms of actual implementations, again, really broad. And there's a thick fuzzy gray line between kind of what is and is not considered a DAO, and some very different opinions. But I tend to be pretty open-minded about what I would actually consider a DAO, because I think it's, as much as anything, kind of an ethos.
I love that. What I'm really fascinated by is the coordination of human capital and financial capital, and like kind of creating incentive models for the human capital to, get equity into the DAO, and for the financial capital to put money up and kind of incentivize the human capital to make their financial capital more valuable. And I'm very fascinated by that concept. Could you maybe dive into how DAOs are working and kind of like cooperating and helping people, kind of like onboarding human capital and incentivizing everybody together?
Yeah, I mean, I think this really incredible rise of the NFT space over the last 6 months to a year has really kind of demonstrated this combination, right, of essentially like the value in humongous network effects of users or of people that are kind of incentivized to one, be a part of this organization or this collective of people, and then two, to try to kind of proliferate it, try to take on their own efforts to go out and spread the word about it, and essentially like make this thing bigger and better. Incentive design is one of the things I think the cryptocurrency space as a whole has really shone a light on, like the value of good incentive design, and like the tremendous damage that poorly designed incentives can do to a system. So, I mean, some examples of DAOs, some kind of earlier examples are literally just like blockchain networks. Like you could consider Bitcoin as a network, or Ethereum as a network, or any other kind of cryptocurrency network as a DAO. And what I mean by that is that it's a bunch of people essentially acting in their own self-interest to do work to contribute to this network. And when I say work, I mean things like mining, but also or staking, or kind of helping the network to reach consensus or to secure the network.
Marketing.
Yeah, but also marketing, going out and evangelizing for this new technology. And so like the fact that by having acquired some of this token kind of early on, you now have an incentive to help grow its network. That kind of incentive alignment is a huge reason that these things have proliferated the way that they have.
I really love that. I recently heard that, some of these 10,000 PFP projects could even somewhat technically be looked at potentially as a DAO, right? Like buying a Bored Ape could, like, now you're a part of this DAO, and like your buying is like actually the ape.
Right. I mean, some of them legitimately are a DAO. Like there's depends on obviously which one, but like some have already set up systems. So it's like when you once you own one of these NFTs, then you now have a vote in this DAO, and you can use that vote to decide how the DAO allocates its treasury and what kind of things it wants to do and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, like there's a handful of them that already are DAOs, and many more that are looking to kind of go down that progressive decentralization journey, and move from a project that's controlled by a core team into one that's fully kind of owned and run by its community.
I love how that's all progressing. So could you tell us about what is the Zodiac collection of tools? I know like it's a part of like the Gnosis Safe. So could you kind of dive into what is this tool set and what does it do?
Right. So I guess before we dive into like specifically what is Zodiac, I'll take a step back and just kind of explain one of the issues that we kind of identified with the DAO space. And so essentially you have a whole bunch of DAO frameworks that have been built over the last couple of years. So Aragon, Colony, DAO Stack, Compound Governance, which is now kind of OpenZephyr governance. And all of these frameworks are phenomenal. They do, they're really cool, really kind of well thought out frameworks, but all of them kind of, to a certain extent, kind of lock you into that ecosystem. There's very little composability between those frameworks. And so that's the kind of problem space that Zodiac looks to address. And essentially what it wants to do is decouple your account from the logic that controls it. So the thing kind of on-chain that holds all of your assets or controls systems from the thing on-chain that kind of implements the logic to control that. And so what basically Zodiac is our attempt to do this. And what we've done is late last year, we went on this, we kind of did a wholesale audit of the DAO tooling in the space in the lead up to launching the Gnosis DAO. Realized that none of them quite kind of checked all of the boxes for what we wanted for the Gnosis DAO. And in particular, those things were, we wanted something that was proven to be able to secure billions of dollars. So very few of the existing frameworks can kind of credibly claim that. And then on top of that, we wanted something that is very, has a low cost for participation. And so the issue with a bunch of the existing frameworks was that most of the voting kind of happened on chain. And so if that's on Ethereum mainnet, it was quite expensive. And then the third part was just wanting it to be flexible, wanting it to not lock us into kind of one path, and to avoid kind of really painful migration paths later on. And so we essentially, in doing that kind of wholesale review of the DAO space, recognized that there was this pattern that had emerged in mostly in the DeFi space of people spinning up a Gnosis Safe and then a snapshot instance, and kind of using snapshot as a way to kind of informally poll the community's opinion, and then have the Gnosis Safe kind of multi-sig owners execute whatever proposals the snapshot community, or like the community in this snapshot space had defined. And so kind of working on top of this pattern, we figured, okay, what if we can create a route to kind of bring that off-chain voting on-chain? And that's essentially, we achieved that using a really neat kind of game theoretic oracle system called reality.eth. This is all kind of going into the weeds a bit too much. All that just to say that,
you know, some of the people will like it.
yeah. So all that just to say that we recognized that we could actually use the Gnosis Safe as the core of a DAO, and this, by doing this, we'd be able to kind of check all the boxes that we want for our own use case. But then in kind of doing that, we also realized that, hey, this is a really great pattern for DAOs to adopt, so that they can avoid the scenario of, you know, picking one governance tool and then six months down the road, after your organization's grown and adapted and changed, needing to go through this kind of monumental migration effort to change to whatever the new governance tool that you want to use is. So rather than kind of having a governance tool and having it actually hold your assets and control your systems, you just use that governance tool to control your organization's on-chain avatar in this Gnosis Safe. And so that's basically this pattern that Zodiac is trying to encourage. Is we want people to spin up an avatar, the Gnosis Safe contract, and then control it with other kind of modules, other DAO frameworks, or kind of any number of a whole bunch of different modules that we've created using this framework. So Zodiac right now is basically this philosophy, this design philosophy, and then a collection of tools that we've built and plugins to other platforms that we've built to enable organizations to operate this way. And one of the really, I guess there's two really cool features that I like to talk about. One is that it enables really kind of seamless progressive decentralization. So it can start off as a group of friends, who just spin up a Gnosis Safe in their Discord server, and it can grow into a fully kind of trustless DAO where the original group of friends now has no direct control over it. It's controlled by a DAO. And the assets and the systems it controls never have to move from that original Gnosis Safe. It's this kind of really seamless pathway. And then the other really neat thing that this decoupling of kind of account and control does is allow for things like these kind of interdimensional DAOs. DAOs that exist in one execution environment. You have your like logic to control it in one execution environment, and then you have your avatar deployed in another. So you could have something like a Gnosis Safe deployed on mainnet that's controlled by a DAO over on XDAI. And so that way you can have like your control logic deployed somewhere where execution is cheap, but still have your avatar deployed on mainnet where you can play with all the DeFi and all that kind of stuff. and then the kind of extending that same pattern further, you could have a DAO on XDAI control a safe on XDAI and a safe on mainnet and a safe on Arbitrum and Optimism and Polygon and anywhere else that's EVM compatible. And so you end up allowing these organizations to just expand beyond their kind of chosen execution environment. And so I think, yeah, those two things in particular are really, really great benefits of kind of adopting this pattern.
That's so awesome. So the way I hear that is like it allows me to start a DAO or you like with my friends and kind of manage it together through a multi-sig, but then as we scale, it turns more decentralized, right? So it's moving from like a centralized entity that maybe 3 or 4 or 5 of us, are making sure that we're protecting, controlling until it gets large enough where we say, okay, through the people who are a part of it and the people who are voting on chain, we can now take a step back and basically give it to the hands of the community.
Right, yeah. And so because it's this kind of like modular pattern, you can also do that in really gradual steps. So one of the hardest part with that is like you and your group of friends, you create this project, it's your baby, right? And it's a really big step to just all of a sudden go, all right, community, it's yours now. And then, just let it go. And so like enabling that to be a gradual process, I think is a really, really key piece to essentially like this DAO pattern proliferating. So, having the ability to start off with this multi-sig with a tight group of friends, then introduce some kind of soft consensus mechanism where the community can say what they want, but they don't have any direct control. And then maybe adding in some way for them to have direct control in parallel with your multi-sig. So like you could have both a DAO framework and your multi-sig operating on the same account. And essentially because the multi-sig can act faster, it still kind of ultimately controls it, but the DAO has some autonomy. And then maybe a next step is to limit the scope of what the multi-sig can do. So maybe now rather than it being able to do anything at once, it's just there as a safeguard so it can like veto malicious things that might make their way through the DAO. If you're still kind of, the community is still finding its legs and you don't kind of 100% trust it yet, then you may say, okay, we want to have this backstop there in the multi-sig signer. And then, eventually just getting rid of the multi-sig signers altogether and, going no hands mode, letting the DAO do its thing.
It's super exciting. So I feel like right now is this kind of like opportunity where people are like, okay, I'm learning about DAOs. Maybe I want to create a DAO. And for me, there's kind of like this hesitation and this fear to like, I'm going to mess it up. I'm going to do it wrong. So maybe like, how would someone start a DAO? Like, what would they need to do first? And like, how would you speak to like someone who's like, man, I have this idea, but like, I know how to do a company, but what if I fuck up the DAO and it ruins everything? Like, is there a way to kind of like step by step walk through it that's like less risky?
Right. I mean, risk, I guess, depends on what kind of risk you're talking about, but we'll maybe avoid that rabbit hole for now. But yeah, I think like this kind of progressive decentralization pathway, or this kind of multitude of potential pathways there, I think is a really great way of de-risking that. Again, your only real risk initially is finding the small group of people that you want to start this up with. They can be as simple as a multi-sig in a Discord server, or a multi-sig in a Telegram group, or something like that. And then you kind of grow it from there and add in the modules, the kind of additional components, kind of if and when they make sense, and kind of do it in a way where you can always revert back if it's not working, as you intend. You kind of make those gradual steps as you become comfortable. I mean, in terms of like the specifics of how to do that, I'm always available to help people out in kind of working through that, but it's pretty use case dependent. So I'm hesitant to lay out like concrete steps that people should take, in any case, because I think it really depends on what you want your DAO to be able to do, what kind of assets you're wanting to control with it, and like what kind of inputs you want to get from different people and all that kind of stuff. So without that context, it's hard to make kind of really general recommendations. Other than I think that people should kind of adopt this pattern where they pick this kind of composable avatar, more than likely a Gnosis Safe, and then use other frameworks to control it once they want to go beyond the multi-sig stage.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like that's really helpful and like why I wanted to get you on the channel today, because I think I think this is revolutionary. You know, like when I was reading about Zodiac and just checking out DAOs, I was like, wow, like y'all are. It's like we're all flying this plane that's getting built as we're flying. You know, and kind of like the old school startup concept. So, you know, what has been some challenges for you in being a part of a DAO, creating a DAO, so you can kind of put some of those landmines out there for people to avoid?
Yeah. So I think like the biggest challenge that I've run into in kind of getting DAOs up and running in the past has been essentially accountability. So like early, and I think this is the same for early stage startups as well. Often it's just, um, you know, when you're at a point where things are not kind of capitalized, where you don't necessarily have kind of tangible rewards for people, it's often kind of unreasonable to, or it feels unreasonable to have kind of expectations on people's time, and it's really easy to kind of have goals, have things that you want to get done, but not necessarily know who's going to do it, who's actually going to kind of take on responsibilities and get stuff done. And so I think like that's the big kind of challenge for bootstrapping a young organization, whether it's a DAO or anything else, is just really being able to find that right group of initial people, and then one, kind of collectively delegate who's going to do what, and then two, kind of hold all of those people accountable.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. And like for both, right? For a traditional company, it's like the team is the most important. And then this is also fascinating to me because the way I look at things is like, let's just say for the last 10 years, there's been this thing going on between entrepreneurs, maybe 20, but it's more of a new phenomenon where, you know, a young entrepreneur would come to you and say, hey, I have this idea. I want to give you 15% of my company, you know, or even like, I want you to be an advisor. And I think in this traditional sense, it's like, I understand that because we do have to create these kind of incentive models, but it's like, okay, you're giving me 15%. Like, what does that mean for me? You know, it's like, when are you going to sell the company? You know, it's like, it's almost giving somebody something that's so intangible, you know, and it's so imaginary until it's not. I feel like it's almost, it's like not fair, but it's like the best thing we have. And so that's why I'm really fascinated by DAOs and like, okay, we have where it's like, I can pay you in the DAO token. Yes, the DAO token doesn't have much value now, or if any, but if we all work together, this isn't just some like piece of paper that you're putting in your closet that hopefully something happens. Like you could essentially, you know, sell your liquidity right like tomorrow if you wanted and just say, hey, $10, like, you know, and I love that idea of like you're getting what you own, and it's like it's like you can get liquidity for it potentially if you wanted to, in a more like straightforward way than like, hey, I own this stock and I'm going to try to sell you my shares. Like that seems very far fetched to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a double-edged sword, right? Immediate liquidity puts a bunch of pressure on an organization as well. Like you immediately end up with this scenario where you get people who are focused on the price of the token as opposed to on the mission. You know, you end up with like one of the scourges of the like the DAO ecosystem is the users that come in, they buy some small fraction of the tokens, or they kind of get some fraction of the tokens, and then they immediately jump in and kind of demand, you know, when is the number going to go up? And it's so frustrating. But I mean, that's I guess, yeah, again, one of the potential kind of pitfalls of that. One thing that I like, the light bulb only recently kind of went off for me is the kind of analog to this in the NFT space, where you're essentially kind of coupling that kind of early participation with a like really strong cultural element. And so it's, like I said, literally within the last few days, finally the light bulb went off for me and saying like, hey, there's actually something here that I've totally been missing. And I think that is really cool. So like the idea of you being able to kind of join and participate in a community for the kind of primarily for the cultural part of it, because you know, enjoy the aesthetic of what they've produced, and you enjoy the kind of the community aspect of it, the right to participate in this community, or I guess like street cred, for lack of a better word, that you get for having this having one of these tokens, or having gotten it at some point, before other people, or whatever it is. That kind of cultural element on top of the potential incentive, like the potential financial incentives, I think is really, really powerful, and to a certain extent kind of shifts the focus away from the immediate need to kind of capitalize these things, and back more towards the like collectively participating in something.
Wow, that's so powerful. Like, to me, that represents one of our human needs, is to be a part of something bigger than ourselves, right? It's like kind of the role of religion in some ways, and like certain organizations that are big around the country, around the world, right? And so kind of this cultural belonging being almost like more significant than the money, but then, having some pathway that it all comes together, like in the future. I think that's a really powerful insight. I think that's awesome. What made you like, kind of what made you see that? Like, was there a community that kind of was doing something, you're like, yo, the culture here, like what was that aha moment for you?
Yeah, I think I've been listening in on a bunch of Twitter Spaces from various different profile picture kind of NFT projects, and so like seeing some of the enthusiasm around that has been really cool. I have been a little bit disappointed in the kind of percentage of discussion that kind of reverts back to price relevant stuff, where it's like it's a discussion around like whatever the floor price is, or whatever people's entry price was, and stuff like that. So that kind of disappoints me a bit. But there's a whole bunch of other discussion around essentially like what people just want to collectively get done. And I mean, this happens in all kinds of DAOs, NFT related or not. But there seems to be a whole different level of passion involved with these NFT based projects. And again, I think it largely is springing from the cultural side of it, where it's like the primary thing that this kind of collection of NFT profile pictures creates there is kind of an in-group, is this group of people who are kind of immediately part of this tribe, and are deliberately going and kind of displaying it publicly. And so, yeah, that to me just seems like a really powerful concept that, again, I feel like I missed for the longest time, or I didn't understand.
I can really identify with that. I'm a part of the Crypto Cannabis Club, and a lot of like the energy there is just like, hey, we're tokers, and it's just like, it's a lot of cannabis culture, much more than I hear in other, servers talking about the price of things. It's more a community, and then that brings people to the community for beyond the price. Although I think, obviously people want the price of things to go up, but that's, to your point, there's a reason the price of things go up, right? Like, there's a reason why movies or music is popular, why certain art is popular. And I think it's really awesome how NFTs are kind of cultivating the cultural energy, like, and also merging it inside of crypto, right? And like, I've always heard this thing, like, what's the number one thing you can buy with Bitcoin? Altcoins, right? It's like, what's the number one thing you can buy with like Ethereum is like NFTs. So it's like, naturally, as this market rises, people are looking to invest in this like cultural space, because, rather than putting it into fiat, it's like, there's a whole place that we can all invest in. And in the metaverse being built, I think is kind of like going down that line as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you think is the future of DAOs, and how will this all evolve in upcoming years from your perspective?
Yeah, I think like broadly, I see two kind of categories of DAOs. One is this kind of general purpose DAO, where you get a bunch of people together and you say, hey, we've got this shared treasury, or we've got this shared kind of on-chain avatar, and we want to make it do things. We want to go and create a shared collection of NFTs, or we want to go and invest in DeFi protocols, or whatever it is. We want to go give out grants, or whatever. Yeah. So you've got this kind of one like general purpose kind of style DAO, that can take on any number of kind of different forms. And then I think the other kind of broad category of DAOs is much more tightly scoped. This is where I fit in things like the Bitcoin network or the Ethereum network, where you say like the inputs that you can have to the system are still quite varied, but like in terms of actually influencing the system itself, the inputs that you have are essentially in the Bitcoin network, it would be mining. So like miners are participating in that network to secure it, but also to kind of gain the reward from doing it. And so I guess the point that I'm trying to make there is this is the second kind of class of DAO, or I guess first, since it kind of existed first, is these DAOs where you have like some desired outcome, and that desired outcome is engineered to be kind of an emergent result of people's just self-interested input into the system. And I think one really cool thing that I'm excited to see as like a future pathway for the DAO space is essentially people coming up with some desired outcome and then engineering systems where that desired outcome is the emergent result of these kind of uncoordinated inputs from kind of self-interested actors. And so like a really good example of that is quadratic funding. I've in my spare time, I've been working on a project called ClearFund, which is this kind of quadratic funding protocol. Some people here may have heard about quadratic funding through Gitcoin. Gitcoin Grants is a quadratic funding platform where people can come and contribute to projects they value, and then that helps to allocate a funding pool. And so the kind of DAO version of this in something like ClearFund is essentially you say, we have this result that we want, which is essentially well allocated matching funds to Ethereum's public goods. And we're going to achieve that through these kind of uncoordinated inputs into the system in terms of people contributing to the projects they value. And from those uncoordinated inputs, we're able to achieve this outcome of allocating this matching pool efficiently and well to all of Ethereum's public goods. And so I think like those type of problems I'm really excited about, ones where we can say like, here's this thing that we want to achieve. How can we design a system where uncoordinated people or entities can kind of interact with the system and have the emergent result be the thing that we're hoping for?
And that's more like on a larger scale.
Well, I think that those types of DAOs have the potential to scale a long way beyond the other types of DAOs because they don't require coordination. You see a lot of the DAO space talk about the kind of Moloch problem, this idea of Moloch, you know, the god of kind of human coordination failure kind of thing. And Moloch DAO is this kind of, I guess, you know, is named as in response to that. But like in reality, most of these DAO tools require still a huge amount of coordination between the participants in them. And so that's, yeah, what I'm excited about is the potential for us to kind of build tools to achieve really interesting outcomes that actually reduce the coordination costs to do it.
Wow, like all this is really blowing my mind. I read this book that I was gifted from Tony Hsieh of Zappos, rest in peace. It was called, I think it's like The Future of Building or The Future of Cities. And it really talked about how cities are going to be built out in the future. And so much of the problems that we face as humans is a coordination problem, right? Like we have the technologies to solve sometimes hunger. There's a lot of things that we have, but taking that technology and coordinating it all throughout the world in the places that it's needed, we still in some ways lack the tool set to do that. And I think potentially this is a part of the solution, which is like really, really exciting on a macro scale.
Right. Yeah, and not even necessarily tool sets, just like the incentives. Like you said, like world hunger, I've heard a lot of people kind of make the claim that it's something that could and should have been solved, but it's just like the incentives have not aligned to have someone, you know, for people to actually go and distribute the food. You know, like there's an outrageous amount of food that's wasted just because it's a logistical nightmare to try to get it to somewhere where it actually is going to be consumed. And so, yeah, I think those kind of problems I don't know. That's a tricky one. Like anywhere where it starts to venture back out into the real world, into meat space, it becomes a little bit more difficult for DAOs to tangibly affect, aside from kind of capital allocation. But yeah, I do think that there's a real potential to kind of engineer systems where these are kind of similar problems, or the solutions to these are similar problems, are kind of emergent results of like uncoordinated influence. I think that's the way that it almost necessarily needs to be to kind of reach the scale where it's globally impactful.
So interesting. So one other thought I have, just because it's kind of similar, but it's like interesting. So what was that called? Groupon. You remember Groupon? How big it got?
Right.
Like, and that's kind of like in some ways it's like scaling people to come together and save money. And on the business side, it's like bringing people into their business. They actually started as like this concept that was supposed to like help raise money for like causes. So they were like, it was like, okay, we want Target to pay for this thing, and we're gonna get all these people to stop shopping at Target unless Target pays for this thing. They ended up, going with the pizza thing because that worked. But I think like there's all these entrepreneurs that are kind of like, bumping up against the walls of like this kind of coordination issue, and I find it all so fascinating. So Auryn, how can people connect with you more? How can people learn more about the Zodiac toolset that you've been helping to build?
Yeah, if anyone wants to connect, then probably the easiest way to get in touch is on Twitter at Auryn_Macmillan. Otherwise, jump into the Gnosis Discord server, chat.gnosis.io, or the Gnosis Guild Discord server, which is relatively recent. You can find the link to that on some of the recent blog posts from Gnosis Guild. They're up on Miro. Maybe we can drop some links to that in the show notes
I will
afterwards.
for sure.
Cool.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'll throw all that in the show notes. Auryn, thank you so much for joining us and just sharing your wealth of knowledge about DAOs and what you've been working on with the Zodiac. And thanks to y'all, the listeners, the audience. We really appreciate y'all for tuning in. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe and comment down below. And until next time, peace and love.